About 30 years ago, huge historical events reshaped Europe, bringing democracy and freedom back to many nations in Central and Eastern Europe. It is my honor and pleasure to have a conversation about those topics with Mr. Valdis Zatlers, the President of the Republic of Latvia from 2007 to 2011. Mr. President, good day.
Good day.
Looking back from today, how do you assess those events from 1989 to 1991 in your country and in the whole Europe?
Absolutely, it was the most significant event which happened in the second half of the 20th century. And it substantially changed everything in Europe, not only in our countries, Estonia and Latvia, but in all the Eastern Europe and Europe as a whole. So we haven't expected any event like that since that time. So we have experienced a very historical moment in our lives.
The Baltic states and other states of the Eastern Europe took a long journey to the European Union and NATO. And many people were talking in the 90s that, well, they will not make it. How do you overview the journey of the Baltic states to European Union, and are we now kind of, full members in every meaning?
I would say that 30 years ago, most of the people said we need it and we will do it, but usually, there were some voices that said, maybe it's impossible. You see, if you want to do that and you make your best and you do your homework, it's very important to send a message for those who are outside the EU and outside NATO. You had to do your homework, and we were ready for that homework. And if we, let's say, analyze the last 30 years, how many fundamental failures our countries did, and I would say very seldom. Most of the choices, most of the decisions were substantial to our nations, and we see the best ever result we could ever imagine.
How do you think, is the question of solidarity now important for Europe? Many people say that there are problems with solidarity in the cases of migration. There are less understanding between South and Northern Europe because different styles of life and different structures of economy. Do you feel that something is decreasing the solidarity inside the European Union?
You see, people express solidarity when they have challenges, threats, or big problems. In everyday life, people are not very keen to be in solidarity with the others. And you're absolutely right. Every region has its own experience, including experience of solidarity. And the Baltic region, and I would say now Baltic and the Nordic region, is a very good example. We have been in a great extent of solidarity since the beginning. Since we organized our national fronts and organizations, and we had the common goal to get back to the free world. So there will be problems with solidarity because the historical experience and let's say experience of really how solidarity helps each other is very different in different regions of the European Union. And of course, migration hits the definite country. And the others who don't have the problem, they hesitate to think about that, even think about that. But you see, in any case, including this immigration case, Europe found the solutions as a whole. And now we see Frontex working on Lithuania, and the action was very quick. And let's say, Lukashenko offers some help that we don't need help. Europe is strong enough and is ready to react on anything. So there is not perfect solidarity, but we are becoming more perfect and more perfect as a Europe as a whole.
You also mentioned the historical legacy. Well, here in Central and Eastern Europe, nations formed a strong opinion condemning both biggest totalitarian ideologies of the past century, the National Socialism and the Communism. Well, but it's not like this for the rest of Europe, which had experience only with the National Socialism. How do you assess this question of different memory politics inside the Europe?
Memories about the history are a very sensitive issue. Each family has its own history and his perception of the history, but what happened with definite family. And each nation has a definite experience of history. And let's say the war starts in different dates, and usually that's a date when the foreign army occupied your territory. And the Eastern Europe suffered from both. So the understanding of totalitarian regimes, whatever they are, communist or national socialist, is a good experience, and we have to show it to the rest of the Europe. And we have to understand that the word communist in Latvia is a very bad word. The word communist in Spain is a good word. And these are the differences, and we have to respect the different sensitive moments of history of each country of EU, and we have to try to explain why this is sensitive. And when I tell Austrians that the sensitive date is 1955, at the first moment they don't understand. And after a while, they start smiling and say, yes, that is the restoration of Austrian state. And therefore, they have the sentiment, positive sentiment towards Russia, because the Soviet Union was a part of this process of restoring Austrian state. And must not try to change it, but we have to explain why this is sensitive for our nation.
Mm-hmm. Talking a bit about actual politics, the main ideological mainstreams 30 years ago were conservatism, liberalism, and social democracy as a traditional directions of politics. Can you a bit kind of compare the state of those ideologies 30 years ago and now? Did they change a lot?
30 years, there was a very distinct division between conservatives, liberals, and socialists. Today we have liberal populism, we have conservative populism, and socialist has been populistic all the time. And we have new structures, new terminology. We are talking about, let's say, the social market economy with Chinese characteristics, and we don't know what it is. But basically, the populists have come in much more wider scale than it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, we were focused on the goal. Today, we live in a very, very balanced society and a very, very diverse society. And different opinions are around. And we all know that in the Eastern Europe. But sometimes the French, the Italians, and Germans have to learn it from the beginning. The attitude has changed, not the principles.
Attitudes had changed a lot. Many of those people who teared down the Berlin Wall or stood in the Baltic wave from Tallinn to Riga, from Riga to Vilnius, and risked with their lives fighting the communist dictatorships, many of those people actually changed their opinion and now are voting for much more autocratic and populistic parties. How do you think, what kind of switch was made in the mentality?
We live much better. There are not too many threats to our freedoms, and we try to abuse our freedoms in different ways. And every time when you abuse something, you get into trouble, It's all about all things. Therefore, they try to express their own individual rights, and they forget that democracy is about human rights for the whole population. It's about human rights, about humanity. It's not about only individual rights. Individual rights sometimes are a very different one, and anarchistic even. So we have to go through this period, and I like to compare. In the 90s, you know, the Western people came to Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania, and they were telling, you know, you must be democratic. If somebody thinks in a different way and he is elected in the parliament, you know, respect, because people have voted for that, and that's a part of population that think in the right way. And today we see that we all understand that, and we have very recent experience in Latvia and Estonia that we have to respect it, you know. But the Western part of the world suddenly, you know, is afraid that there are threats from democracy. That these people who think differently are threats from the democracy. No. If we practice democracy and we follow the principles of democracy, I emphasize once again, principles of democracy, not just the populism of democracy, then we will be, you know, in a better future. And there's no threats for our future. So the pendulum, you know, of uncertainty and mistrust in democracy in the western part of Europe is much, much stronger than the eastern part. Nevertheless, that we have strange, let's say, actions in Poland and Hungary, you know, but this is democracy. We have to understand that people think like that, and we have to negotiate and find the compromises how the future of the European Union will be built.
Some large group of population say also that the Brussels, so the structures of the European Union, want to have too much power upon the affairs of Europeans and European states, national states. Is there a real problem with the case of the sovereignty, European Union versus a national state, or it's more made up a problem?
You see, I would not call it made up a problem, but basically, you know, it's very characteristic to human beings that somebody else is guilty for your faults. And you're blaming somebody else, especially if it's a central structure that it's guilty for everything which happens badly to us. I don't think so. You see, the balance between sovereignty and the central power of Brussels is still balanced. What is not ready yet in the European Union is that the central institutions are still young, and they need to practice for more and more, maybe decades, yeah, to become a very effective ones. And if you look at our history, at first we were looking at the Brussels as a god. You know, they will bring us everything what we want. Afterwards, we were using Brussels as, you know, by blaming, we can't do that because the Brussels don't allow us. Or let's say, Brussels say that we have to do that in a different way. Now, I think this time is over, and we see the real balance between Brussels and ourselves. And let's say in Latvia, I don't hear too much about that. People blame Brussels for anything they can't do themselves. And we have to understand that, you know, everybody in all the world, not only in the European Union, tries to blame somebody else because of their own faults. And that's natural and human. So I don't think this is a problem. If somebody feels it's a problem, you know, go on with acting yourself.
Right. Mr. President, a bit about foreign policy of the European Union. Even this term, foreign policy of the European Union, is quite problematic, as we know. There is a strong, big block of the foreign policy that is America, United States of America, that was a guarantee of security and welfare state for many decades for Europeans, at least in the beginning for half of Europe, when there was a communist bloc. Now those relations between European states and America are a bit changing, and many people say even that the trend is bad. How do you feel about European and United States relations now?
I will talk about the transatlantic relations. It would be more up to date. And we should not separate Canada and United States, and we should not separate each country of the European Union separately. Any time when these relations were undermined, the trouble came to both sides of Atlantic Ocean. And I would say that President Trump did a lot to undermine the importance of transatlantic relations. If you think that the relations of that kind that was before Trump will come back, no. But the situation has changed because Europe is developing all the time. And today we have to think about the European Union's attitude, or let's say relations, with Northern America. And there are a lot of, let's say, pitfalls on the road. Let's say the European Union has no representation in the United Nations. Each state is there separately. And but at the same time, the experience of last years with some conflicts on Normandic format is not working. We have to understand, and the EU format may be working. I hope so. Let's say I'm sure that it will work. The problem is that we cannot agree on let's say, common European foreign policy. And when the External Action Service was created, and that day I asked one question: who is going to give the tasks and the goals for this Foreign Action Service? It will become only bureaucratic, or it will become something that is implementing the European Union's foreign policy? And it's still missing. It's becoming a little bit better, but we still miss a united foreign policy. And maybe, Mr. Putin will help us, because we will unite around this problem, which is not a threat, but this is a problem. So we have a lot to do.
Talking more widely, in this new world where there are two centers of power, true centers of power, America and China, and also Russia that you've mentioned is trying to play a huge role in this part of the world. What must be the mission of the European Union in the terms of foreign policy?
We have to define that the European Union is the best example of multilateral attitude towards global order. People are talking about a multipolar world. It's absolutely nonsense, because it means the poles, don't meet each other. They just, respect each other. Multilateral world is also a responsibility, collective responsibility about the future of the world. And EU is the only one good example of multilateral approach, because all the states of European Union, act together, and they are very different, with different cultures, with different political, histories. But this is example which is still developing. And therefore, we are not ready to lead the world, because we are improving ourselves. And sometimes people outside use it as a, let's say, example that they have too many problems. We cannot rely on them, but be our leaders, We are going to fix all our problems. The problems will come. And therefore, European Union is the strongest political and economical union in the whole globe. China is a different system, as I said before, social market economy with Chinese characteristics. We don't know what the Chinese characteristics mean. They took up the German social market economy principle. United States, we don't know. Russia, you see, we have to look at the Russia as it is. Let's say the last champagne accident shows that something is totally wrong in this country. People drink champagne, and one day president decides, that the champagne is good. Only Russians have champagne. That we could claim that it's Latvian vodka, it's not a Russian vodka. Yeah. So this is so stupid that every person can understand that something is going wrong there, as well as they don't control the situation with the COVID pandemic in their country. So this is a real warning that we have to be ready to deal with Russia. And I would say that next word, we will need to help Russia in future. Nevertheless, until there is Putin, he will say, we are not asking for the help. They're isolating. More they isolate, more problems they have.
But what is the real maximum of a political attempt that the nowadays European Union actually can do upon Russia? Because inside the European Union there are so many different approaches, and some states actually being far away from Russia even don't feel the security issues as we feel here on the borderline.
You see, my principle would be leave Russia alone. Whatever they do inside, we cannot really influence these processes. Yeah, but be very strict on any action what Russia does outside Russia. And let's say we had and let's say let's call it an accident. With a Belarusian flag. Belarusians acted, but why the Russians acted? It was not Russian flag. So Russia, in their leadership, nevertheless, it's a very powerful military, powerful state, is a little bit in confusion. And that's seen from outside. What's inside, we don't know. What the people inside Russia think about their country, we don't know. Yeah, but we are neighbors. And what's very important in these 30 years, we are not anymore dependent on energy from Russia. We are not any dependent on Russian market, and we are not dependent on Russian security. We are dependent on ourselves, and this is a big step forward. So there are not any leverage from in Russia to force us do something which is against our own interests. We have been integrated in EU and in NATO so deeply, and there's no any possibility to change it from outside, except the only enemy of ourselves are ourselves.
The Latvian people, as Estonians and Lithuanians and many others, had a perception of how this life with the West must look like, and what are those institutions and basic values that must be built up when the communist walls will be teared down. Looking back at those events 30 years ago, do you feel that the most important wishes of the Latvian people are now come true?
Yes. And I was giving a speech a year ago on a special occasion, the Independence Day. And I said about not about the failures, because people say we have failed many times. No. Restoration of the independent state, success. The language law, success. The pension reform, success. The school reform, success. Joining EU, success. Joining NATO, success. In introducing euro, success. How many successes we had in the last 30 years? Many. How many failures? Yes, there are some failures. I'm not talking about these today, but let's say most of the actions we did, one country more successfully, the other less successfully, were right things to do. And we have to be proud of that. Every person in our countries have to be proud of that, because he was a part of that, even if he is unsatisfied with everything what is going on today.
Mr. President, I'm sure that you remember what you personally was wishing for when Latvia regained its independence. How about those memories? Did your best wishes come true?
Also, everything happened much better than I expected, and all the goals are achieved in much more scale than we were talking in our kitchens and with our friends in the early 90s. We don't see that. Yes, we don't see that, because you get to use the good things very quickly, and that's true. But I think the most important thing, the self-organization of those days, 30 years ago, was that most important thing that did the whole event to become true. And it was respected by the leaders of the Soviet Union, including the military leaders. Self-organization of a nation is very important.
those kids who are now in kindergartens or elementary schools, do you believe that they will have a more secure, healthier and richer maybe life as Europeans than you and or me do now?
I'm happy with my life, and what I'm proud of is that I have both experiences, the communist system and the free world system. And if somebody talks about the communist system as something good, and today there are a lot of people, talking about the Marxist ideas around the whole world, I said, guys, I have the experiences both. Half of life is communist, half of life is the free world, and I can say you, with full responsibility, the free world is better.
How do you think, for those kids who are now in the elementary school, what are the hugest global calls that they must meet as politicians, businessmen, or just citizens and voters in the next decades?
You see, we have to think about education system all the time, because all these Marxist ideas which are around and all the populist ideas which are around, that's because of some failures in our education system. And we have forgotten a very important thing, that we have to teach our children to survive, to protect their interests, and to be ready for failures. And what we see today, there is a rising demand and young generation, for psychologists and whatever, mental assistants, which is not about the life around. It is about the education they got, especially in the first 7 years of their age. They are not prepared many times for the real world, which has not been changed in the basic principles. The format has changed from communist to free world. And free world is sometimes much more difficult than the authoritarian world. And at the same time, the internet and social media, you have very easy to switch off me or somebody else if you don't like to talk and don't pick up the phone and other. But if you meet people face to face, you have to face all the differences, problems, and even, hatreds, because it's real. It's not virtual anymore. And so it's very important how to put these two things together, the virtual world, and I don't like all these talks about artificial intellect. It's far from human intellect, and the real world, the communication skills, let's say the negotiation skills, the performance skills, which these all things must be taught in schools. And that's what I try to do with my children and my grandchildren. I'm going to have success or to fail. I don't know. They know better. I like young people, and I usually think that even in politics, you need the new generations to come in. Because, let's say, the old guys like me, they don't understand fully 100% the young generation which are in their 20s and 30s. And therefore, they have to express what they want, what they are the wishes. And we old guys have to only just say, we are going to support you. We are going to support the young generation in any way they need.
Mr. President, thank you very much for this extremely interesting and frank conversation. And I'm really kind of happy that you have so kind of a lot of energy to spread this hope to younger people.
We become older each day, even these young people. Thank you very much. I hope to express all my gratitude for taking time and asking me the questions now, and I'm pleased to answer.
Thank you much. I wish you a lot of luck in your personal and working life too.
Thank you.